Little Emma was having the best day of her 3-year-old life. The September sun bathed her front yard in golden light as she chased monarch butterflies through the freshly cut grass, her pigtails bouncing with each jubilant leap. Her pink sneakers, still tied in the clumsy double knots her mother Sarah had managed that morning, left tiny footprints in the dew-soaked lawn. Emma's laughter, that pure, uninhibited sound that only small children can produce, echoed down Maple Street, mixing with the distant hum of and the cheerful chirping of robins. Sarah stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching her daughter with that mixture of joy and vigilance that defines motherhood. She'd taken the afternoon off from her nursing job at General Hospital specifically for this, quality time with Emma before the chaos of preschool applications and holiday preparations consumed their fall. The neighborhood was perfect for moments like this: tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors who waved from their porches, and virtually no crime. It was exactly why Sarah and her husband had stretched their budget to buy their modest ranch house here 5 years ago. Emma had just managed to touch the wing of a particularly slow butterfly when everything changed in an instant. The sound came first, a deep, guttural barking that shattered the peaceful afternoon like a hammer through glass. Sarah's head snapped up, her nursing instincts immediately screaming danger. Then she saw it, a massive German shepherd, easily 80 pounds of muscle and fur, exploding through the Johnson's hedge like a missile locked on target. "Emma!" Sarah's scream tore from her throat as the coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the porch steps. She launched herself forward, but she was too far away, at least 40 feet from her daughter. Time seemed to slow and accelerate simultaneously, that horrifying phenomenon that occurs during true emergencies. The dog was Zeus, though Sarah didn't know that yet. She didn't know he was Officer Mike's K-9 partner, trained in apprehension and narcotics detection. She didn't know that Zeus had somehow managed to open the improperly latched door of his patrol car during what should have been a routine traffic stop 2 houses down. She didn't know that Zeus, excited by the outdoor smells and sounds after hours in the vehicle, had simply wanted to run and play. All Sarah knew was that a massive, barking dog was charging full speed at her baby girl. Emma's face transformed from joy to terror in a heartbeat. She turned toward the sound, saw the approaching animal, and her 3-year-old brain couldn't process what was happening fast enough. She stood frozen, a small statue in a pink dress, as Zeus closed the distance with frightening speed. "No, no, stop!" Sarah was running now, her voice raw with panic, but she wasn't fast enough. Nothing could have been fast enough. Zeus hit Emma like a freight train. The collision sent the tiny girl flying backward, her lightweight body no match for the dog's momentum. Emma's piercing scream cut through the air as she crashed onto the grass, Zeus's massive paws on her chest. The dog's face was inches from hers, his barking deafening, his breath hot against her skin. Emma could see nothing but teeth and fur and dark eyes, could feel nothing but crushing weight and terror so complete it seemed to stop her heart. Across the street, retired teacher, no relation to officer, had been watering her roses when the incident began. Her doorbell camera, installed by her tech-savvy grandson just 3 weeks earlier, captured everything. The footage would later show Emma's butterfly chase, the sudden appearance of Zeus through the hedge, Sarah's desperate sprint, and the horrifying moment of impact. It showed Emma's legs kicking frantically, her tiny fists pushing uselessly against Zeus's muscular chest, her mouth open in continuous screaming. The video, lasting only 23 seconds, would become crucial evidence. It would also go viral, viewed millions of times by people who would debate its meaning endlessly. "Zeus, Zeus, H-I-E-R. Officer Mike's voice boomed as he sprinted down the street, his police radio bouncing against his hip, his face pale with horror. Was a 12-year veteran of the police department, and Zeus had been his partner for 6 years. They'd found missing children together, located drugs that had saved lives, even tracked down a robbery suspect through 3 miles of woods. Zeus had never, ever shown aggression toward a child. Never. But training overcame Zeus's excitement. At his handler's command, delivered in German as all police K9 commands are, Zeus immediately backed off Emma. The dog sat, panting heavily, his tail wagging uncertainly as if confused about why everyone seemed upset. Sarah reached her daughter 3 seconds later, scooping Emma into her arms with a primal sound, part sob, part scream. Emma was hysterical, her small body shaking violently, her screams now interspersed with choking gasps for air. Sarah performed a rapid nursing assessment even through her panic. Emma's left wrist was already swelling, bent at an angle that made Sarah's stomach drop. Blood seeped from scrapes on both of Emma's arms where the grass and Zeus's claws had torn skin. Emma's dress was covered in grass stains and dog hair. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," officer was saying, his hands raised in a gesture of helplessness. "The car door it must have, Zeus has never." "Get that dog away from my daughter." Sarah's voice was pure fury, pure maternal rage. "Get away." Neighbors poured from their houses. Mr. Palmer from next door, the Johnson family from across the street, young Martinez from the corner lot. Within minutes, someone had called 911. Within 7 minutes, an ambulance arrived, its sirens adding to the chaos. Within 10 minutes, Emma was being loaded into the vehicle, still screaming, while Sarah climbed in beside her, her own hands shaking so badly she could barely fasten her. Officer stood in the yard, Zeus sitting obediently at his side, watching the ambulance pull away. His face was ashen. His hands trembled as he pulled out his radio to report to dispatch. In his 12 years on the force, he'd faced down armed suspects, had dealt with domestic violence situations, had even been shot at once. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of that tiny girl's terrified face, or the sound of her mother's anguished screams. His doorbell camera had stopped recording at the 30-second mark, its motion sensor timing out, but it had captured enough, more than enough. At General Hospital, X-rays confirmed what Sarah had feared. Emma had a radial fracture in her left wrist, requiring immediate casting. The scrapes were cleaned and bandaged. But as Dr. James, the attending pediatrician, quietly told Sarah in the hallway outside Emma's room, the physical injuries were probably the least of their worries. "She's going to remember this," Doctor said gently, his kind eyes filled with concern. 3 years old is old enough to form lasting traumatic memories. You should consider connecting with a child psychologist. Soon. Sarah nodded numbly, barely hearing him. Through the window of Emma's room, she could see her daughter lying on the hospital bed, finally quiet but staring at the ceiling with wide, unseeing eyes. Emma hadn't spoken a word since they'd arrived at the hospital. Not one word. Burst through the emergency room doors 45 minutes after the incident, having broken every speed limit from his construction site across town. When he saw Emma's cast and Sarah's tear-stained face, he had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. That night, as Emma finally fell into an exhausted sleep in her own bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with and did something she'd never thought she'd do. She called a lawyer. Jennifer, recommended by Sarah's colleague at the hospital, answered on the third ring. Sarah explained what had happened, her voice breaking multiple times. "Send me that doorbell footage," Jennifer said, her voice suddenly sharp and professional. "And don't speak to anyone from the police department without me present. This is negligence, Sarah, clear negligence. That dog should never have been able to escape that vehicle, and now your daughter is traumatized. We're going to make this right." As Sarah hung up, she walked back to Emma's room and stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep. Emma's small face twitched, her body jerking periodically. Already, nightmares were forming. Sarah thought about the butterfly Emma had been chasing, the pure joy on her face just moments before everything changed. That joy seemed like it belonged to a different lifetime now. A lifetime that had ended 23 seconds after it began, captured frame by frame on a neighbor's doorbell camera. Sarah didn't know it yet, but those 23 seconds would change everything. Not just for her family, but for an entire community, a police department, and eventually, for the way courts across the country would handle cases involving children and trauma. But that night, all Sarah knew was that her daughter's laughter had been replaced by screams, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The lawsuit announcement hit like a Category 5 hurricane, and the small Ohio town would never be the same. Jennifer scheduled the press conference for Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the incident. She'd chosen the courthouse steps deliberately. The symbolism was important. At precisely 10 a.m., she appeared before a cluster of local reporters, Sarah standing beside her with Emma conspicuously absent. Jennifer held up an enlarged photograph of Emma's X-ray in one hand and a still frame from the doorbell footage in the other. "What you're looking at," Jennifer began, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd, "is the result of systemic negligence by the police department. A 3-year-old child, playing innocently in her own front yard, was violently attacked by an improperly secured police K-9. Emma now has a fractured wrist, multiple lacerations, and psychological trauma that may follow her for the rest of her life." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We are filing a lawsuit seeking damages for medical expenses, ongoing psychological treatment, pain and suffering, and punitive damages to send a message. Police departments cannot allow dangerous animals to roam free in residential neighborhoods. We are also demanding that Zeus, the dog involved, be immediately removed from active duty pending a full behavioral evaluation." The last sentence detonated like a bomb. By noon, the story had spread across every social media platform. By 2 p.m., the police union had called their own press conference. Union President Lieutenant David stood in full dress uniform, flanked by a dozen officers including Mike, and delivered a blistering counterstatement. "Officer is a decorated veteran with 12 years of exemplary service," declared, his voice hard as steel. "Zeus is a highly trained K-9 who has helped find 3 missing children, assisted in 17 felony arrests, and located over $40,000 in illegal narcotics. What happened to Emma was a tragic accident, emphasis on accident. Officer has expressed profound remorse, but this lawsuit is nothing more than an opportunistic money grab that threatens to destroy a good officer's career and end the life of a dedicated service animal." The battle lines were drawn. Within 48 hours, transformed into a war zone of competing loyalties. Frank Palmer, who owned Palmer's Hardware on Main Street, put up a massive banner reading "We Back the Blue" across his storefront. Within hours, someone had spray-painted "What About Emma" across his front window. The vandalism made the evening news. Frank installed security cameras and vowed to press charges if he caught the culprit. 3 doors down, Riverside, owned by Maria Santos, whose own daughter was Emma's age, displayed a poster with Emma's pre-incident photograph, smiling and carefree, with the words "Justice for Emma" emblazoned above it. By the next morning, someone had left a dead rat on her doorstep with a note, "Traitor to the badge." Maria called the police, but when officer's partner responded to the call, she refused to let him in and demanded a different officer. The community Facebook page, previously dedicated to garage sales and restaurant recommendations, became a digital battlefield. Retired schoolteacher posted the doorbell footage with the caption, "Watch what that poor baby went through. How can anyone defend this?" The post received 847 shares in 6 hours and 1,203 comments before moderators locked it. Timothy, a volunteer firefighter and former Marine, responded with his own post, "Zeus has saved lives. Where's the outrage when criminals walk free on technicalities? Officer is being for a door latch malfunction. This is what's wrong with America. Sue first, think later." His post garnered 623 shares and its own comment war. The arguments escalated beyond the digital realm. At high school, 2 teachers got into a screaming match in the faculty lounge that ended with one throwing coffee and the other storming out. Principal Henderson sent a staff-wide email pleading for civility. At Mary's Catholic Church, Father dedicated his Sunday homily to forgiveness and healing, carefully threading the needle by mentioning both Emma and Officer by name. Half the congregation stood and applauded. The other half sat in stony silence. 3 families walked out mid-sermon. The family became prisoners in their own home. Sarah couldn't walk to the mailbox without cameras clicking and reporters shouting questions. "Mrs., do you want Zeus euthanized?" "Sarah, is it true you're asking for $2 million? How is Emma doing?" The questions came like bullets, rapid fire and relentless. But the death threats were worse. They started arriving the second day after the lawsuit announcement, anonymous calls to their home phone at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. "You're destroying a hero cop's life, you money-hungry bitch. That dog should finish the job. Watch your back, Sarah. Accidents happen." Installed a security system and started sleeping with a baseball bat next to the bed. Sarah stopped answering the phone entirely. They disconnected their doorbell because strangers kept ringing it at all hours. Emma, mercifully, understood none of this. She remained inside, her world now confined to the walls of their home, her casted wrist a constant reminder of the 23 seconds that had changed everything. Officer Mike wasn't faring much better. The department had placed him on administrative duty pending the lawsuit's resolution, which meant he spent his days behind a desk instead of on patrol. Worse, they'd temporarily reassigned Zeus to Sergeant Martinez for training exercises, separating the partners who'd worked together for 6 years. The separation devastated both of them. Couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's terrified face, heard her screams. He'd driven past the house 4 times, wanting to apologize in person, to somehow make Sarah understand that he'd never meant for any of this to happen. But his attorney had strictly forbidden any contact. "Don't give them more ammunition," the lawyer had warned. His wife found him crying in their garage one night, Zeus's spare collar clutched in his hands. "I keep thinking about my own kids," he whispered. "If someone's dog hurt them like that, God, I'd want to kill somebody, but Zeus isn't vicious. He was just excited. He's never shown aggression. Never." Held him while he sobbed, but she had no answers. The uncertainty was crushing both of them. The local news coverage became obsessive. Channel 7's evening broadcast led with Divided for 9 consecutive nights. They interviewed residents on both sides, creating carefully edited segments that maximized conflict. Ratings soared. National outlets picked up the story. CNN sent a correspondent. Fox News sent their own. MSNBC did a special segment on police K-9 protocols nationwide, using the case as their centerpiece. The town council called an emergency meeting to address the growing crisis. Mayor Thornton faced a packed gymnasium of angry residents demanding action, though they couldn't agree on what that action should be. Pro-police residents demanded the lawsuit be dismissed, and the family publicly apologized to Officer. Emma's supporters demanded comprehensive K-9 policy reform and immediate termination. The meeting lasted 4 hours and accomplished nothing except making the divisions deeper. When Councilman Robert Hayes suggested forming a mediation committee to bring both sides together, he was shouted down by both camps. "There's no mediating child abuse," someone screamed. "It's not abuse, it's an accident," someone else roared back. Mayor Thornton eventually gavelled the meeting to a close before fistfights broke out. At elementary school, Emma's 4-year-old cousin Danny became the target of bullying. During recess, 3 older boys, sons of police officers, surrounded him. "Your cousin is trying to kill police dogs," one sneered. "That makes your whole family cop haters." They pushed Danny down, and when the teacher intervened, their parents complained that their sons were being persecuted for having police parents. Sarah's nursing supervisor at General called her into the office 3 weeks after the incident. "I need you to understand," Dr. Helen Price said carefully, "that several staff members have expressed discomfort working with you. Given the current climate and given that we work closely with first responders, I think it might be best if you took an extended leave of absence." "You're firing me," Sarah said flatly. "I'm suggesting a voluntary leave until things calm down," Dr. Price corrected. But her eyes said what her words didn't. Sarah was being pushed out. The hospital couldn't afford to alienate the police and fire departments they depended on for emergency transport. Sarah cleaned out her locker that afternoon. 13 years of nursing career reduced to a cardboard box of personal items. His construction company didn't fire him, but has made their feelings clear. His lunch disappeared from the break room fridge. Someone scratched Sue Happy into his truck's paint. His boss, Tom, a former cop himself, stopped assigning to the better-paying jobs. The message was clear: he wasn't wanted. The financial pressure mounted daily. With Sarah's income gone and legal fees accumulating despite Jennifer working partially on contingency, the family burned through their savings account. Took a second job doing overnight security at a warehouse. Sarah started selling their belongings on Facebook Marketplace. First the nice furniture, then golf clubs, then her grandmother's china set. Meanwhile, a support officer GoFundMe campaign raised $43,000 in 2 weeks. A competing Help Emma Heal campaign raised $27,000. The campaigns became another, with donors leaving vicious comments attacking the opposing side. 6 weeks after the incident, someone threw a brick through this front window at 3 a.m. The brick had a note wrapped around it: "Drop the lawsuit or next time it's a Molotov cocktail." Called 911, but when officers arrived, notably, not officer, they spent more time questioning whether the family had staged it for sympathy than investigating who'd thrown the brick. The local newspaper, the Courier, tried to remain neutral but found it impossible. Editor James ran an opinion piece titled, "Where Has Our Community Spirit Gone?" The letters to the editor section overflowed with hundreds of submissions, evenly split between vitriol toward the family and demands for police accountability. Eventually stopped running letters entirely after receiving his own death threat. As autumn deepened and leaves fell from famous maple trees, the town that had once prided itself on neighborly friendships and small-town values resembled something closer to a civil war. Friendships that had lasted decades ended over Facebook arguments. Families stopped speaking to each other over Thanksgiving dinner table debates. Churches saw their attendance drop as congregants refused to worship alongside people on the opposing side. And at the center of it all sat a legal battle that neither side seemed capable of winning, only of fighting until something, or someone, broke completely. Dr. Moore had been a child psychologist for 17 years, specializing in childhood trauma, and she thought she'd seen everything. Then she met Emma and realized she'd never encountered a case quite like this. The first session took place 3 weeks after the incident, in Dr. Moore's carefully designed office. Soft lighting, pastel walls, shelves filled with toys and art supplies, everything calculated to make children feel safe. Sarah carried Emma through the door because the 3-year-old refused to walk, her small body rigid with tension, her eyes darting to every corner as if expecting attack from any direction. "Hello, Emma," Dr. Moore said in her gentlest voice, kneeling to the child's level. "My name is Doctor. You can call me Miss if you like. I have lots of toys here. Would you like to see them?" Emma said nothing. She pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, her casted arm dangling awkwardly, and made herself as small as possible. Sarah's eyes were rimmed with red, her voice cracking as she explained. "She hasn't spoken since the hospital, not one word. She used to talk constantly, full sentences, questions about everything, singing all the time. Now, nothing." Dr. Moore had seen selective mutism before, but something about Emma's silence felt different, deeper, more profound. This wasn't a child choosing not to speak. This was a child who had forgotten how to believe the world was safe enough for words. That first session lasted 90 minutes and yielded almost nothing. Emma refused to leave Sarah's lap. She wouldn't touch any toys. She wouldn't make eye contact. When Dr. Moore gently tried to engage her with a stuffed bunny, Emma flinched so violently that Sarah gasped. The only response Dr. Moore got was when she accidentally dropped a book, creating a sudden loud noise. Emma's reaction was instantaneous and heartbreaking. She screamed, a raw sound of pure terror, and began hyperventilating so badly that Sarah had to use breathing techniques to calm her down. "She does that now," Sarah explained, tears streaming down her face. "Any sudden noise, a door closing, a car backfiring, someone dropping something, she just loses it." Dr. Moore made careful notes, her heart heavy. The technical term was post-traumatic stress disorder, rarely diagnosed in children so young, but the symptoms were textbook: hypervigilance, severe startle response, avoidance behaviors, emotional numbing, and regression in development. But the reality behind the clinical terms was so much worse than the diagnosis suggested. Emma's nightmares began the very first night after the attack and had only intensified since. Every single night, like clockwork, she would wake up screaming between 2 and 3 a.m. Sarah and took turns sleeping in Emma's room, but nothing helped. The screams would tear through the house, primal, desperate sounds that made physically ill to hear. When they finally calmed Emma down, she would be drenched in sweat, shaking uncontrollably, unable or unwilling to articulate what she'd seen in her dreams. Had installed a baby monitor with a camera so they could watch Emma sleep. The footage was devastating. Even when Emma wasn't having active nightmares, she never achieved deep, restful sleep. She tossed constantly, whimpered, and her small body would jerk with muscle spasms every few minutes. Some nights, Sarah would find Emma sleeping under her bed rather than in it, as if hiding from invisible predators. The regression extended far beyond her selective mutism. Emma had been fully potty trained for 8 months before the incident. Within 2 weeks afterward, she was back in diapers, having frequent accidents even during the day. She had stopped feeding herself, requiring Sarah to spoon-feed her like an infant. She had abandoned all her favorite activities. No more coloring books, no more building blocks, no more dress-up games with her beloved princess costumes. Most heartbreakingly, Emma had stopped smiling. Completely. Her face had become a blank mask, devoid of expression, as if all emotion had been drained from her small body. The bubbly, giggling, endlessly curious little girl had been replaced by a hollow shell who stared at nothing for hours. Sarah had systematically removed everything dog-related from their home. Emma's stuffed animal collection, which had included 3 plush puppies that were her favorites, went into garbage bags in the basement. Took down a framed print of a Norman painting that featured a boy with his dog. Sarah even replaced Emma's favorite bedtime storybook, The Puppy Who Learned to Share, with a book about rabbits. But it wasn't enough. Dogs were everywhere in the world beyond their home, and Emma's terror response was triggered by anything remotely canine. The first time it happened in public was at Target, 2 weeks after the incident. Sarah had thought a quick shopping trip might help Emma feel normal. They were in the toy aisle when another child walked past wearing a t-shirt with a cartoon dog on it. Emma saw it, and the scream that erupted from her tiny body made every head in the store turn. She went into a full panic attack, screaming, gasping for air, clawing at her mother to escape. Sarah had to abandon her cart and run from the store, while other shoppers stared in judgment and confusion. Television became a minefield. Emma had loved watching Daniel Tiger and Blue's Clues, but the moment any animated dog appeared on screen, even the friendliest cartoon representation, Emma would begin screaming and wouldn't stop until the TV was turned off entirely. A commercial for dog food sent her into such severe distress that she vomited from the panic. Sarah started pre-screening everything, but it was impossible to avoid dogs completely. They appeared in commercials, on billboards, in magazines, in the doctor's waiting room, each citing Emma's trauma, and each episode seemed to make her worse rather than better. Dr. Moore's evaluation process took 6 weeks and included multiple sessions, play therapy attempts, art therapy that Emma refused to engage with, and careful observation of Emma's interactions with her parents. The final report ran 47 pages, single-spaced, and made for devastating reading. Patient presence with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Moore wrote in her clinical summary. Symptoms include selective mutism, severe regression in developmental milestones, persistent nightmares, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, and generalized anxiety with specific zoophobia, fear of dogs. Patient demonstrates avoidance behaviors consistent with PTSD, including social withdrawal and emotional numbing. The trauma has fundamentally altered patient's sense of safety and trust in her environment. But there was one paragraph that hit Sarah like a physical blow when she read it in Dr. Moore's office. It is my professional opinion that Emma's psychological trauma may prove more debilitating and longer lasting than her physical injuries. Without intensive intervention, there is significant risk of this trauma calcifying into permanent anxiety disorders, potential agoraphobia, and severe limitation of normal childhood development and socialization. Patient's current trajectory suggests she may be unable to attend traditional preschool or kindergarten without extensive therapeutic progress. "You're saying she might never be normal again," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Moore chose her words carefully. "I'm saying that without proper intervention, Emma's trauma could define the rest of her childhood and possibly her entire life. But Sarah," she leaned forward, her eyes intense, "children are remarkably resilient when given the right support. Emma can heal, but it's going to take time, specialized therapy, and probably years of work." Years, the word hung in the air like a death sentence. The therapy sessions continued twice weekly, though progress was glacially slow. Dr. Moore used every technique in her arsenal: play therapy with non-threatening animals like rabbits and birds, art therapy encouraging Emma to draw her feelings, sand tray therapy allowing Emma to create scenes without words, and carefully graduated exposure therapy starting with pictures of the least threatening animals possible. By week 8, Emma had made her first tiny breakthrough. She touched a stuffed bunny. She held it for exactly 4 seconds before dropping it, but Dr. Moore celebrated it as a victory. By week 10, Emma had successfully colored a picture of a butterfly, her first engagement with art since the incident. Dr. Moore documented everything meticulously, knowing that her notes would be crucial evidence in the lawsuit. But for every small step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps back. Halloween approached, and Sarah didn't even consider taking Emma trick-or-treating. The thought of Emma seeing children in costumes, potentially dog costumes, was unthinkable. They stayed home with the lights off, and Emma spent the evening hiding under her bed while Sarah sat on the floor beside her, reading stories that Emma never responded to. Struggled with his own trauma, secondary traumatic stress from watching his daughter's suffering. He started drinking more, just a beer or 2 each night to take the edge off, but Sarah noticed the six-packs disappearing faster each week. They barely spoke to each other anymore except about Emma's care. Their marriage, once strong, was cracking under the relentless pressure. Emma's 4th birthday came in early November, exactly 2 months after the incident. Sarah had planned to have a small party, just family, nothing overwhelming. But the morning of Emma's birthday, Sarah found her daughter had wet the bed again and was sitting in her room, staring at the wall with that blank, empty expression that had become her default face. "Happy birthday, baby girl," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside Emma and gently brushing her daughter's hair. "You're 4 years old today, my big girl." Emma didn't respond, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge that she'd heard anything at all. Sarah canceled the party. Instead, she and Emma sat in the living room while Sarah brought out a small cake with 4 candles. They sang "Happy Birthday" while Emma stared at the flames with no expression. When they told her to make a wish and blow out the candles, Emma didn't move. Eventually, blew them out himself, and Sarah cut the cake with tears running down her face. Emma didn't eat any of it. That night, Dr. Moore received an email from Sarah at 11:47 p.m. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. My daughter is gone. I look at her and I see a stranger. The Emma I knew, happy, bright, full of life, she died that day in our front yard. I don't know how to get her back. I don't know if I ever can. Some days I think the lawsuit is pointless because no amount of money can fix what's been broken. But then I get angry because someone has to pay for this. Someone has to acknowledge that my daughter's childhood was stolen. I just don't know anymore. I don't know anything except that I'm watching my baby disappear and I'm powerless to stop it. Dr. Moore read the email twice, her professional composure cracking. She'd seen traumatized children before, had helped many of them heal. But Emma's case was different. The severity of the trauma combined with the child's young age and the ongoing stress of the lawsuit and community division had created a perfect storm of factors working against recovery. She printed out the email and added it to Emma's file, now over 3 inches thick. Then she sat at her desk in her dark office and did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She cried for a patient. Because Dr. Moore, child psychologist with 17 years of experience, wasn't certain she knew how to save Emma. And that terrified her more than she could say. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the morning of November 18th, 643 days after the incident that had torn apart. Every wooden bench held spectators squeezed shoulder to shoulder, the overflow crowd standing along the back wall despite the bailiff's protests. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat of 200 observers, creating a stifling atmosphere thick with tension and anticipation. Judge Thomas had presided over the Franklin County Court for 32 years. At 67, with steel-gray hair and deep lines etched into his weathered face, he'd seen virtually every type of case imaginable: murders, corporate fraud, custody battles that made grown men weep. But nothing in his 3 decades on the bench had prepared him for the V Police Department case. He'd spent the previous weekend reading and rereading the case files in his study at home, his wife bringing him coffee and sandwiches that grew cold as he pored over hundreds of pages of documents. Dr. Moore's psychological evaluation. The doorbell camera footage, which he'd watched 17 times, each viewing more disturbing than the last. Medical records. Expert testimony from K-9 trainers on both sides. Character witnesses for officer. Testimony from Sarah that had made even the court reporter cry. But what haunted Judge most was the video deposition of Emma herself, now 4.5 years old. The child psychologist who'd conducted the interview had used anatomically correct stuffed animals and gentle questioning. Emma had finally begun speaking again, barely, hesitantly, in a voice so small it was almost inaudible on the recording. When asked to identify which animal looked like the dog that had hurt her, Emma had pointed to the German Shepherd stuffed animal. Then she'd begun shaking so violently that the interview had to be terminated. The footage showed Dr. Moore holding Emma while the child screamed and screamed, a sound that seemed to drill directly into Judge's soul. On the opposite side of the case files sat equally compelling evidence of officers' exemplary record. Commendations from the mayor. Letters from parents of children Zeus had helped find. Video of Zeus demonstrating perfect obedience during training exercises. A mechanical engineer's report showing that the patrol car's door latch had a manufacturing defect that had since been recalled. Evidence suggesting this truly had been an accident, not negligence. Judge had arrived at court that morning with a decision that would shock everyone in the courtroom. His clerk had tried to talk him out of it the previous Friday. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is unprecedented," had said, her usual composure cracking. "I've searched case law going back 50 years. Nothing like this has ever been ordered. The appeals court will crucify you." "Let them," Judge had replied quietly. "I'm retiring in 18 months anyway. I didn't spend 3 decades on this bench just to follow precedent when precedent fails to serve justice." Now, as he looked out over the packed courtroom, Judge felt the weight of what he was about to do. Jennifer sat at the plaintiff's table, her expensive suit immaculate, her expression confident. She'd built what she believed was an airtight case: medical evidence, psychological evidence, video evidence, and a sympathetic victim whose childhood had been destroyed. At the defense table sat the police department's attorney, equally confident in his case. He'd lined up expert witnesses to testify that Zeus was a Model K9, that the door latch failure was unforeseeable, that Officer had followed all protocols, and that while the incident was tragic, it didn't rise to the level of actionable negligence. Sarah sat directly behind Jennifer, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Sarah had lost 23 pounds since the incident, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame, dark circles permanently etched under her eyes. Construction-roughened hands trembled slightly as he squeezed his wife's fingers. Officer Mike sat 3 rows behind the defense table, in full dress uniform as his union representative had insisted. His face was gaunt, and if you looked closely, you could see the slight tremor in his left hand, the physical manifestation of the anxiety disorder he'd developed over the past months. Zeus, of course, wasn't present. The dog remained in the K9 kennels, his fate hanging in the balance of this courtroom drama. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and 200 people stood as one. Judge entered, his black robe swishing, and took his seat at the bench. The gavel came down once, a sharp crack that made several people jump. "Please be seated," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent courtroom. "We're here for pre-trial motions in Versus Police Department. Before we proceed with the motions as filed, I have something I need to address." Jennifer exchanged confused glances. This wasn't on the schedule. Judge removed his reading glasses and set them carefully on the bench. When he spoke, his voice was measured but carried an edge of something the veteran lawyers couldn't quite identify. Determination, perhaps, or maybe resignation. "I've presided over this court for 32 years, he began. "In that time, I've heard thousands of cases. I've sent people to prison. I've awarded damages in the millions. I've made decisions that changed lives, ended careers, and sometimes, though I hope rarely, resulted in injustice despite my best efforts to avoid it." The courtroom remained absolutely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. "This case," Judge continued, "has troubled me more deeply than any I've encountered. On one hand, we have a child who has suffered genuine, documented, severe psychological trauma. The evidence is undeniable. On the other hand, we have a police officer with an exemplary record and a service animal who, by all accounts, had never shown aggression before that day. The evidence of officer's character and Zeus's training is equally undeniable." He paused, taking a sip of water from the glass he'd placed at his elbow. "Both sides have built compelling cases. Ms., your documentation of Emma's suffering is heartbreaking and thorough. Mr., your evidence of officer's professionalism and the mechanical failure is equally persuasive. If I were to rule based solely on the evidence as presented, I believe either side could legitimately claim victory or injustice, depending on how I weighed competing factors." Jennifer's confident expression began to falter. Something was coming, something unexpected. "But here's what troubles me," Judge said, his voice dropping slightly. "I've read Dr. Moore's evaluation. I've watched the video deposition of Emma, and I've realized that everyone in this courtroom, myself included, is making assumptions about this child's trauma based on reports, second-hand observations, and expert testimony. We're treating her like an exhibit rather than a person." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the bench. "Emma has not been in this courtroom. She has not seen Officer since the incident. She has not seen Zeus. All of her therapy, all of her trauma treatment has been conducted in the abstract, dealing with her fear of dogs in general, of the memory of the attack. But the specific source of her trauma, this specific dog, this specific officer, has remained a specter, an invisible monster that grows larger in imagination than it might be in reality." Rose to his feet. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not, Mr. Sit down." The command was sharp, brooking no argument, sat. "What I'm about to order," Judge continued, "is unusual, unprecedented actually. My clerk has informed me that she can find no case law supporting it, The appeals court may very well overturn me, but I believe it's necessary for justice, real justice, not legal justice, to be served in this case. The tension in the courtroom had become almost unbearable. Sarah gripped his hand so tightly he winced. Judge picked up a document and read from it formally. I am ordering a supervised, controlled encounter between Emma and the police K-9 designated as Zeus to take place in this courtroom under conditions I will specify. The purpose of this encounter is to provide the court with direct observational evidence of Emma's current psychological state and her specific reaction to the source of her trauma. The courtroom exploded. Jennifer shot to her feet, her voice cracking with fury. Your Honor, you cannot be serious. You're ordering us to a 4-year-old child. This is unconscionable. This is. Ms., control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt. Judge's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I am not finished. The noise subsided, but angry murmurs continued rippling through the crowd. Sarah was crying openly and had half risen from his seat, his face flushed with anger. The conditions will be as follows, Judge continued, speaking over the disruption. The encounter will last no more than 5 minutes. Emma will remain in her mother's arms at all times. Mrs. may leave the courtroom with Emma at any moment she chooses. Zeus will be muzzled, leashed, and under officers' direct control at all times. Dr. Moore will be present to supervise and will have authority to terminate the encounter immediately if she determines Emma is experiencing undue distress. The courtroom will be cleared of all observers except essential personnel, attorneys, court staff, and Dr. Moore. Your Honor, I must object in the strongest possible. Jennifer was nearly shouting now. Your objection is noted and overruled. Mister, do you have any objections? Stood slowly, clearly caught completely off guard. Your Honor, the defense has no objection to the court observing the child's reaction to Zeus. However, I share Ms.'s concerns about the psychological impact. Noted, Dr. Moore, you've been observing these proceedings. Do you have an opinion? All eyes turned to Dr. Moore, sitting in the gallery. She stood slowly, her face pale. Every person in the courtroom waited for her response. Your Honor, she said carefully, as Emma's treating psychologist, my first obligation is to her. What you're proposing carries significant risks. Emma has made progress in therapy, but she remains highly traumatized. Exposure to Zeus could set back months of work. Is that a no, Dr. Moore? Dr. Moore was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. However, Emma's current treatment involves gradual exposure therapy using pictures and videos of dogs. We've made limited progress. The reality is that Emma will encounter dogs in the real world eventually. A controlled encounter, under ideal conditions with immediate support available, might actually provide therapeutic value that we cannot achieve in my office. It could potentially allow her to see that Zeus, in a calm state under control, is not the monster her trauma has created in her mind. She paused, then added, But Your Honor, if we do this, it must be done exactly right. One mistake, one moment of Emma feeling unsafe, and we could cause severe regression. The conditions you've outlined are good, but I would add one more. I must be allowed to spend time with Emma immediately before the encounter to prepare her, and I must have final authority to cancel if I determine she's not ready. Judge nodded. Agreed. The encounter will take place 1 week from today, November 25th at 10 a.m. in this courtroom. Dr. Moore will meet with Emma for preparation sessions before that date. All parties are ordered to cooperate fully. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The courtroom erupted into complete chaos. Reporters bolted for the exits, shouting into cell phones. Spectators argued with each other, some defending the judge's wisdom while others condemned it as judicial malpractice. Jennifer was already on her phone to the appellate court, filing an emergency motion to block the order. Sarah collapsed into his arms, sobbing. I can't do this to her, she wept. I can't make her face that dog again, I can't. Officer Mike sat frozen in his seat, his face ashen. He thought this day would bring clarity about his future, about Zeus's future. Instead, it had brought something he'd never anticipated, the possibility of facing Emma again, of seeing firsthand the damage his partner had caused. Outside the courtroom, news vans were already broadcasting live. Breaking news from, in a stunning and controversial decision, Judge Thomas has ordered a face-to-face meeting between traumatized 4-year-old Emma and Zeus, the police dog who attacked her. Dr. Moore sat alone in the courtroom long after everyone else had left, staring at the empty judge's bench. She just agreed to something that could either heal her patient or destroy her completely. And she had exactly 1 week to figure out which it would be. The week before the courtroom encounter felt like waiting for an execution. For everyone involved, the 7 days stretched into an eternity of anxiety, preparation, and soul-searching that would test them all in ways they'd never imagined. Dr. Moore cleared her entire schedule, everything else in her practice, the teenager struggling with depression, the 8-year-old with ADHD, the sibling rivalry case she'd been mediating. All of it was reassigned to colleagues. Emma became her sole focus, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The first preparation session took place on Tuesday morning, just 72 hours after Judge's shocking order. Sarah brought Emma into Dr. Moore's office, and the psychologist immediately noticed that Emma had regressed again. The small progress they'd made over recent months, Emma occasionally speaking in single words, managing to sleep through 1 or 2 nights per week, had evaporated. Emma was back to complete silence, her eyes vacant, her small body rigid with tension. "Emma, sweetie, we need to talk about something important," Dr. Moore began, kneeling to Emma's eye level. She'd spent hours planning her approach, consulting with childhood trauma specialists across the country, reading every piece of literature on controlled exposure therapy she could find. Emma stared through her, not at her. Dr. Moore pulled out a photo album she'd carefully prepared. The first pages showed pictures of different dogs, golden retrievers, beagles, tiny chihuahuas. Emma's breathing quickened, but she didn't look away. Good, Dr. Moore thought. She's not running. That's progress. Dogs come in many shapes and sizes, Dr. Moore said softly, turning pages slowly. Some are big, some are small. Some have jobs like helping police officers or helping people who can't see. The dog you met, Zeus, is a working dog. He has a job helping officer keep people safe. At the mention of Zeus's name, Emma's entire body went rigid. Her small hands clenched into fists. "I know you're scared of Zeus," Dr. Moore continued, her voice steady and calm. "That's okay. It makes sense to be scared of something that hurt you. But Emma, I need you to understand something really important. Zeus didn't mean to hurt you. He was excited and he didn't understand that he was too big and too strong for a little girl." Emma's lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Sarah watched from her chair, tears streaming silently down her face. She'd barely slept in days, tortured by the question of whether she should refuse Judge's order, pack up Emma and simply leave forever. But Jennifer had been clear. Defying a direct court order would destroy their case and could result in contempt charges. They were trapped. The second preparation session on Wednesday went deeper. Dr. Moore introduced video footage, not of Zeus, not yet, but of police K-9 demonstrations she'd obtained from departments in other cities. Emma watched German shepherds performing obedience exercises, sitting perfectly still, following commands, behaving with absolute discipline and control. "See how the dog listens to the officer," Dr. Moore narrated. "The officer says sit and the dog sits. The officer says stay and the dog doesn't move even when there are distractions. Police dogs are trained to be very, very controlled. They only do what their officer tells them to do." Emma watched the videos with an intensity that surprised Dr. Moore. The psychologist made careful notes. Patient appears to be processing information. showing interest rather than pure fear response. Possible cognitive reframing beginning. On Thursday, Dr. Moore took the enormous risk of showing Emma actual footage of Zeus, not from the incident, but from a police department training video that officer had provided. The video showed Zeus performing a perfect obedience demonstration, sitting motionless for 5 full minutes while other dogs and handlers moved around him. Emma's reaction was immediate and severe. She began hyperventilating, her small chest heaving, her face turning red, but she didn't look away. Even through her panic, Emma kept her eyes locked on the screen. "That's Zeus," Dr. Moore said quietly. "That's the dog who scared you. Look at him, Emma. He's sitting very still. His officer is right there with him. Zeus is being good. He's being calm. He's not running or jumping. He's just sitting." Emma's breathing gradually slowed. She watched the entire 5-minute video without looking away once. When it ended, she did something that made both Dr. Moore and Sarah gasp. She pointed at the screen and then made a gesture like she wanted to see it again. Dr. Moore played it 3 more times. Each time, Emma's physical stress response decreased slightly. By the 4th viewing, Emma's breathing was almost normal. She was learning. Her brilliant, traumatized young mind was beginning to understand that Zeus could be controlled, could be calm, could be something other than the terrifying monster of her memories. Friday's session focused on what would happen in the courtroom. Dr. Moore had obtained permission to visit Judge's courtroom after hours, and she brought Sarah and Emma to the empty chamber. The vast room with its high ceilings and dark wood paneling intimidated Emma initially, but Dr. Moore walked her through everything. "This is where you'll sit with Mommy," Dr. Moore said, settling into a chair. "Mommy will hold you the whole time. I'll be right here next to you. Zeus will be over there." She pointed to a spot she'd marked with tape 20 feet away with officer. "Zeus will be wearing a special collar called a muzzle that makes sure he can't open his mouth. He'll have a leash, a very short leash, so officer can control him completely." They practiced sitting in the courtroom for 20 minutes. Then Dr. Moore did something inspired. She had a colleague dress in a dog costume, a deliberately non-threatening cartoon-style costume, and walk into the courtroom while Emma sat with Sarah. Emma tensed but didn't panic. The costumed colleague sat in the designated spot, remained motionless, and then left. They repeated the exercise 5 times until Emma's stress response was minimal. "You're doing so well, sweetie," Dr. Moore encouraged. So well. On Monday it will be similar to this. Zeus will come in, he'll sit in that spot, and he'll stay very still. You don't have to do anything except sit with Mommy. If you get too scared and want to leave, Mommy will take you out immediately. You're in control, Emma. Nothing will happen that you don't want to happen." Emma's eyes, those traumatized, haunted eyes that had seen too much fear for such a young child, met Dr. Moore's directly for the first time in months. And Emma nodded. Just once, barely perceptible, but it was a nod. Understanding, agreement, perhaps even the tiniest spark of courage. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Mike was engaged in his own intensive preparation with Zeus. The K-9 training facility had become their second home, and worked his partner through obedience drills with an intensity bordering on obsession. Commanded in German the command for down. Zeus dropped instantly, his body hitting the floor, and remained absolutely motionless. Walked circles around him, jumped near him, clapped his hands, created every distraction possible. Zeus didn't move a muscle. "Stay," walked to the far end of the training facility, 70 feet away, and Zeus remained frozen in position for 15 full minutes without the slightest movement. Sergeant Martinez, the department's K-9 coordinator, watched the training sessions with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Mike, Zeus is performing perfectly. You know that, right? He's always been disciplined, but this level of control is exceptional even for him." "It has to be perfect," said, his voice hoarse from hours of commands. "Better than perfect. If Zeus so much as shifts his weight wrong, if he looks at that little girl the wrong way, if he does anything that makes her more afraid." He couldn't finish the sentence. Had lost 15 pounds since judge's order. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep without nightmares of his own dreams where Emma's face morphed into his own daughter's face, where he saw his children experiencing the same terror Emma had endured. His wife had found him crying in the shower twice, convinced that his career was over, that Zeus would be euthanized, that everything he'd worked for was crumbling. Zeus is a good dog, kept telling him. You're a good officer. This was an accident. You have to remember that. But knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally were two different things, and was drowning in guilt that no amount of reason could wash away. By Saturday, the media circus had reached its peak. News vans from national networks had set up a semi-permanent camp outside the courthouse. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and BBC all planned to cover Monday's encounter live. Legal experts debated judge decision on every news channel. Child psychologists appeared on morning shows arguing both sides, some calling it innovative trauma therapy, others denouncing it as judicial child abuse. A child advocacy group filed an emergency appeal with the state Supreme Court, arguing that judge had exceeded his authority and violated Emma's rights. The appeal was Saturday evening with a terse statement. While the lower court's order is highly unusual, it does not constitute an abuse of judicial discretion given the extensive safeguards in place. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse Saturday night, even though the building was closed. Pro-Emma demonstrators held candles and signs reading, "Protect Children, Not DOGS," and Emma's RIGHTS Matter. Pro-police counter-protesters held their own signs. "Support K9 OFFICERS and ACCIDNTS aren't crimes." Sarah spent Saturday night in Emma's room, watching her daughter sleep fitfully. Every few minutes, Emma would whimper, and Sarah would gently stroke her hair, whispering reassurances. Sat in the doorway, a silent guardian, his face drawn with exhaustion and fear. "What if we're making a terrible mistake?" Sarah whispered to him at 2 a.m. when Emma had finally fallen into deeper sleep. "What if this breaks her completely? What if she never recovers from seeing that dog again?" Had no answer. He simply moved to sit beside his wife, and they held each other in the darkness, two parents facing a decision that had been taken out of their hands by a judge who thought he knew what was best for their child. Sunday morning, Dr. Moore held one final preparation session. This time, she showed Emma photos of officer in uniform, carefully selected images that made him look non-threatening, smiling at a community event, helping an elderly woman cross the street, with Zeus sitting calmly beside him. "This is Officer," Dr. Moore explained. "He's the officer who works with Zeus. Officer feels very sad about what happened to you. He didn't want Zeus to hurt you. Tomorrow you'll see him with Zeus. He'll make sure Zeus is very, very good and calm." Emma studied the photos for a long time. Then she did something extraordinary. She reached out and touched the photo of and Zeus together, her small finger tracing the outline of the dog. "Zeus," Emma whispered, her first word in nearly 3 days. Dr. Moore's heart leaped. "Yes, sweetie, that's Zeus. Tomorrow you'll see him and he'll show you that he can be calm and good." That evening, as families across prepared for the work week ahead, every person connected to the case was doing their own preparation. Jennifer reviewed her objections, ready to fight if anything went wrong. Prepared officer for the encounter, coaching him on remaining calm and professional regardless of what happened. Judge sat in his study, second-guessing his decision for the 100th time, wondering if his unprecedented order would heal a child or haunt him for the rest of his life. And in a small bedroom on Maple Street, Emma lay in her mother's arms, staring at the ceiling, her mind processing things that no 4-year-old should have to process: fear and courage, trauma and healing, the dog-shaped monster in her nightmares and the real dog she would face in just a few hours. None of them slept well that night. Monday morning was coming, ready or not. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. The sun rose over at 6:47 a.m., casting long shadows across the courthouse steps where news crews had been stationed since 4:30, their satellite trucks lined up like a military convoy preparing for battle. Inside the home, Sarah had been awake since 3 a.m., unable to even pretend to sleep. She'd spent the dark hours sitting beside Emma's bed, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, memorizing every detail of her face as if this might be the last morning before everything changed, for better or for worse. At 6:15, Emma's eyes opened. For a moment, mother and daughter simply looked at each other, an entire conversation happening in silence. Emma knew something important was happening today. Dr. Moore's preparation sessions had ensured that, but the 4-year-old couldn't possibly understand the magnitude of what she was about to face. "Good morning, baby girl," Sarah whispered, forcing brightness into her voice that she absolutely didn't feel. "Today's a big day. Remember what doctor told you. We're going to go see her and you're going to be so brave." Emma didn't speak, but she nodded slowly. Sarah helped her daughter dress in the outfit they'd selected together days ago, a soft purple dress with butterflies embroidered along the hem, purple being Emma's favorite color, butterflies representing the innocence of the day when everything had shattered. Sarah brushed Emma's hair with gentle strokes, securing it with matching butterfly clips, her hands trembling so badly she had to stop twice to compose herself. Made breakfast, Emma's favorite chocolate chip pancakes, but Emma only managed 3 bites before pushing the plate away. None of them had any appetite. The kitchen clock ticked toward 8 a.m. with agonizing slowness, each second feeling like an hour. Across town, Officer Mike had been at the K-9 training facility since 5 a.m. Zeus sensed his handler's anxiety and had been packing restlessly in his kennel until finally let him out for an extended training session. They ran through every command a dozen times. Zeus performed flawlessly, but couldn't shake the sick feeling in his stomach. "You've got this, buddy," murmured, kneeling to look Zeus in the eyes. The German shepherd's intelligent gaze met his handler's and could swear Zeus understood that today was different, that today mattered in ways that other days didn't. "You just need to sit still. That's all. Just sit very, very still and be calm. Can you do that for me?" Zeus licked his face once, his tail wagging slowly, and had to blink back tears. What if Zeus reacted poorly? What if the sight of Emma triggered something? What if this day ended with his partner, his best friend of 6 years, being ordered destroyed because a judge had made an unprecedented decision? Appeared in the training facility doorway at 7:30 with coffee and a protein bar her husband wouldn't eat. "Mike, it's time to get ready. You need to shower, get into your dress uniform. Martinez says the courthouse wants you there by 9:15. Nodded numbly and headed to the facility's locker room, Zeus following at his heels as always. At 8:45 a.m., Dr. Moore arrived at the courthouse through the back entrance, avoiding the media circus at the front. She'd spent the weekend reviewing every piece of research on trauma exposure therapy she could find, consulting with colleagues across the country, and second-guessing her decision to support Judge's order approximately every 15 minutes. She met with Judge in his chambers at 9 a.m. sharp. "Dr. Moore, I need your honest assessment," the judge said without preamble. His face looked haggard, aged 10 years in the past week. "Is Emma ready for this? Am I about to traumatize a child in the name of justice?" Dr. Moore chose her words carefully. "Your Honor, Emma has made remarkable progress in our preparation sessions. She's processed information about Zeus, watched videos, practiced sitting in this courtroom. Her cognitive understanding that Zeus can be controlled has improved significantly. But," she paused, "understanding something cognitively and experiencing it emotionally are vastly different things. I won't know if she's truly ready until the moment it happens. What I can tell you is that I believe the potential therapeutic benefit outweighs the risks, but only barely, and only because of the strict controls you've put in place." Judge nodded slowly. "If at any moment you believe we should stop, you have my absolute authority to end this immediately. Emma's trumps everything else. The case, the evidence gathering, all of it. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Your Honor. At 9:30 a.m., the courtroom began its transformation. Bailiffs cleared out all the spectators who'd been waiting since dawn, ignoring their protests about public access to court proceedings. Only essential personnel would remain: judge, his clerk, the court reporter, the bailiff, attorneys, and Dr. Moore, and of course the family and officer with Zeus. The media was banished to the hallway, where they would wait for whatever scraps of information emerged after the encounter ended. Their cameras and microphones couldn't capture what was about to happen, though they'd certainly try to recreate it later through breathless reporting and expert analysis. At 9:45 a.m., officer arrived through the courthouse's secure entrance with Zeus. The dog wore his full police K9 vest and a specialized muzzle, not the typical cage-style muzzle but a custom-fitted one that allowed Zeus to breathe comfortably but prevented any possibility of his mouth opening. The leash held was the shortest in their equipment arsenal, barely 4 feet long, giving him maximum control. Sergeant Martinez walked beside them, providing moral support and professional oversight. "Remember, Mike, you set Zeus's tone. If you're calm, he'll be calm. If you're anxious, he'll feed off that energy. So breathe. Center yourself. This is just another day of work for Zeus." But it wasn't just another day, and they all knew it. At 9:52 a.m., Jennifer's car pulled into the courthouse parking garage. She'd driven Sarah and Emma herself, not trusting anyone else with their transport. Emma sat in her car seat in the back, clutching a stuffed bunny Dr. Moore had given her, something soft and safe to hold during the encounter. "We don't have to do this," Jennifer said one final time as she put the car in park. "I can walk in there right now and tell the judge that Emma is experiencing medical distress, that this encounter poses imminent psychological harm. He'll have to accept that. We can still stop this." Sarah looked at an entire marriage of communication happening in that single glance. Then she turned to look at Emma in the backseat. Their daughter was pale, her small hands gripping the bunny so tightly her knuckles were white, but her eyes were open and alert, not the vacant, dissociated stare of her worst days. Emma was present, conscious, facing this with as much courage as a 4-year-old could possibly muster. "No," Sarah said quietly, "we've come this far. Dr. Moore thinks it might help. And God help me, I'm starting to think maybe the judge is right. Maybe Emma needs to see that Zeus is just a dog, not the monster she's built up in her mind. We're doing this." At 9:58 a.m., they entered the courthouse through the back entrance, Emma held tightly in Sarah's arms. Dr. Moore met them immediately, her calm presence a lifeline in the chaos of Sarah's emotions. "Hi, Emma," Dr. Moore said softly. "Remember what we practiced. We're going to go into the courtroom and you're going to sit with Mommy. I'll be right next to you the whole time, and Zeus is going to come in with Officer. Zeus will be wearing his special collar and he'll sit very still. If you get scared and want to leave, just tell Mommy and we'll go immediately. You're in control, sweetie. Okay." Emma nodded, burying her face in Sarah's neck. At exactly 10 a.m., Judge's clerk opened the courtroom doors. The room felt cavernous and oppressive simultaneously. The high ceilings seemed to press down despite their height, and every sound echoed with unnatural clarity: the shuffle of feet, the rustle of clothing, the nervous clearing of throats. Jennifer and sat at their respective tables, both lawyers looking uncharacteristically subdued, aware that they were witnessing something that transcended typical legal proceedings. Sarah carried Emma to the designated chair, Dr. Moore settling immediately beside them. Stood behind his wife, his hands on her shoulders, a united family facing the unknown together. Emma remained pressed against her mother, her face hidden, her small body trembling. Judge's voice was gentle when he spoke. "Mrs. Emma, thank you for being here. Emma, you're very brave. We're going to bring Zeus in now with Officer. Remember, Zeus has a special collar and a leash, and Officer will make sure Zeus sits very still. Take all the time you need. There's no rush." He nodded to the bailiff, who opened the rear door of the courtroom. Officer entered first, and for a moment Emma didn't look up. Then Sarah felt her daughter's body stiffen as Zeus appeared, 80 pounds of German Shepherd, his K9 vest making him look even larger and more imposing, his dark fur gleaming under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. Emma's breathing accelerated immediately, her small chest heaving against Sarah's. "Mama," she whimpered, the first word she'd spoken all morning. "I've got you, baby," Sarah whispered fiercely. "Mama's got you, you're safe." And Zeus walked slowly to the designated spot, 20 feet away from where Emma sat, though the distance felt simultaneously too far and not nearly far enough. Gave the command softly, "Down, stay." Zeus dropped into a perfect down position, his body flat against the floor, his head up but his expression calm and neutral. Stood beside him, the short leash wrapped twice around his hand, his entire body language radiating control and protection. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Emma kept her face pressed into Sarah's shoulder for what felt like an eternity, but was actually only 43 seconds by the court reporter's watch. Her breathing was rapid, panicked, and Dr. Moore leaned closer, ready to intervene if Emma showed signs of complete dissociation or panic attack. Then slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, Emma's face turned. Her eyes peeked out from behind Sarah's hair, looking toward Zeus with an expression of pure terror mixed with something else. Curiosity, recognition, the need to confirm that the monster of her nightmares existed in reality. Zeus remained absolutely motionless. His training was impeccable, but it was more than training now. It was as if the dog somehow understood the gravity of this moment, the importance of his stillness. His dark eyes were soft, his ears neutral rather than pinned back or perked forward in aggression or excitement. He was simply there, present but non-threatening. 1 minute passed, 2, 3. Emma's breathing gradually began to slow. She was looking at Zeus fully now, no longer hiding, though her body remained rigid with tension. Sarah's tears flowed silently, dropping onto Emma's butterfly clips, but she didn't make a sound, didn't move, letting her daughter process this at her own pace. Dr. Moore watched Emma's micro-expressions with the intensity of someone reading a life-or-death diagnosis. Emma's pupils were dilated but not maximally. Her breathing was elevated but not hyperventilating. Her muscle tension was high but not frozen. She was scared, terrified, but not dissociating. She was present, processing, engaging with the reality before her rather than fleeing into her trauma response. 4 minutes. Officer stood like a statue, his hand firm on Zeus's leash, though the dog didn't need the restraint. His eyes were locked on Emma's small face, and what he saw there, the terror, the courage, the incredible bravery it took for this child to simply look at the source of her trauma, broke something inside him. Silent tears rolled down his cheeks, which he made no attempt to hide or wipe away. Zeus tilted his head slightly, a movement so small it barely registered, but Emma saw it. The tiny shift in angle, the way Zeus's eyes seemed somehow gentler, almost questioning. The dog wasn't lunging, wasn't barking, wasn't the explosive force of violence from Emma's memories. He was just a dog, lying still, being good, trying in whatever way a dog could try to communicate that he meant no harm. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The air in the courtroom felt electric, charged with emotion so thick it was almost tangible. Judge sat motionless at his bench, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white, wondering if he just made the worst decision of his career or somehow stumbled into genius. Jennifer watched Emma with a mixture of professional concern and unexpected hope. This wasn't going how she'd expected. She'd anticipated immediate trauma response, screaming, evidence that would demolish any defense argument that Emma could recover. Instead, she was watching a child engage with her fear rather than flee from it. 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Then Emma did something no one expected. She loosened her death grip on Sarah's neck. Her small body, which had been rigid with terror for nearly 5 minutes, relaxed incrementally. She stared at Zeus, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. The raw terror began to fade, replaced by something more complex: recognition, assessment, and the beginning of understanding. Zeus remained perfectly still, his brown eyes gentle, his posture completely non-threatening. He was being good. He was being so good. And Emma saw it. Her traumatized 4-year-old mind, which had turned Zeus into a monster of nightmares and terror, was now confronted with the reality. A dog, trained and controlled, sitting calmly, doing exactly what his officer commanded. 5 minutes. Judge was about to call time when Emma's tiny voice cut through the silence like a bell, ringing in a cathedral. 2 words. Just 2 words that would change everything. Good boy. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, so soft that for a split second, everyone in the courtroom questioned whether they'd actually heard it. But they had. Those 2 words, simple, pure, innocent, cut through the heavy silence like a lightning bolt striking the earth. Time stopped. Sarah gasped audibly, her entire body going rigid as the words registered. Her hands flew to her mouth, and tears that had been flowing steadily suddenly became a torrent, streaming down her face in rivers. Her shoulders began to shake with silent sobs as the magnitude of what her daughter had just said crashed over her like a tidal wave. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "Oh my God, Emma." Standing behind his wife, felt his legs nearly give out. He gripped the back of Sarah's chair to keep from collapsing, his weathered construction worker's hands trembling violently. His vision blurred with tears he'd been holding back for months, tears of fear, frustration, anger, and now something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. Officer Mike's reaction was even more dramatic. The moment Emma's words reached his ears, his carefully maintained composure shattered completely. His jaw dropped open, his eyes went wide, and then his face crumpled. Tears that had been building behind his professional facade broke through like a dam bursting. His shoulders shook with the force of his emotion, and he pressed his free hand over his mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. "Jesus," whispered, his voice breaking. "Oh, Jesus." Zeus, sensing his handler's emotional distress, shifted slightly, just the tiniest movement of his head to look up at, but immediately returned to his motionless position. Even the dog seemed to understand that this moment was sacred, that breaking his stillness would be catastrophic. Jennifer dropped her pen. The sound of it hitting the table echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, and she didn't even notice. Her mouth had fallen open in complete shock, her prepared arguments and legal strategies evaporating from her mind. She'd been ready for screaming, for trauma, for evidence to support their case. She hadn't been prepared for this, for forgiveness, for recognition, for a child's simple acknowledgement of a dog trying his best to be good. I can't," Jennifer stammered, unable to complete a coherent sentence. The defense attorney, who'd built his entire case around Zeus being a good dog who'd made a mistake, felt his eyes burning with unexpected tears. He'd argued this point for months in legal briefs and pretrial motions, but hearing it from the mouth of the traumatized child herself carried a weight that no legal argument could ever match. Judge Thomas removed his glasses with shaking hands. His 32 years on the bench had made him a master of courtroom composure, of maintaining the dignity and authority his position demanded. But not today. Today, he was just a man, a grandfather of 4, a human being who just witnessed something transcendent. He wiped his eyes openly, not bothering to hide his emotion, and for once in his distinguished career, he had no words. The court reporter, still no relation to officer despite the shared last name, stopped typing mid-keystroke. Her fingers hovered over her stenography machine, frozen, as tears dripped onto the keys. In 23 years of recording court proceedings, murders, rapes, child abuse cases that had kept her awake at night, she'd never witnessed anything like this. Dr. Moore felt a wave of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked her sideways. Her professional training screamed at her to observe, to document, to maintain clinical objectivity. But the human part of her, the part that had spent months watching Emma suffer, had held her during panic attacks, had doubted whether this child would ever heal. That part was overwhelmed with a mixture of relief, joy, and profound validation. Emma's words revealed something that all the therapy sessions, all the expert testimony, all the legal arguments had failed to capture. She understood. In her own 4-year-old way, Emma had just demonstrated extraordinary emotional intelligence and compassion that most adults never achieve. She wasn't saying Zeus was her friend, or that she forgave him, or that she wasn't still scared. She was simply acknowledging a truth her young mind had finally processed. Zeus was a dog who was trying to be good, who was succeeding at being good right now in this moment, who deserved recognition for his effort. "Good boy," Emma repeated, slightly louder this time, her small voice gaining confidence. She was still in her mother's arms, still tense, still scared. But she was present, she was speaking. She was engaging with reality rather than drowning in trauma. Sarah pulled Emma closer, pressing her face into her daughter's hair, her body shaking with sobs she could no longer control. "Oh baby, oh my brave, beautiful baby girl, I'm so proud of you, so proud." Moved around the chair and wrapped his arms around both his wife and daughter, the three of them holding each other as months of accumulated tension, fear, and anguish began to crack and release. They cried together, Sarah with her face buried in Emma's hair, with tears streaming into his beard, and Emma still staring at Zeus with that complex expression of fear mixed with understanding. Officer was openly weeping now, no longer trying to maintain any semblance of professional composure. His hand remained firm on Zeus's leash, but his other hand covered his face as his shoulders shook. In 6 years of partnership with Zeus, through dangerous situations and life-threatening calls, he'd never been more proud of his dog than he was in this moment. Zeus's perfect stillness, his gentle expression, his complete control, this was what years of training and an exceptional temperament looked like under impossible pressure. "Good boy, Zeus," whispered through his tears. "Such a good boy." The bailiff, a grizzled veteran named Tom who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and prided himself on having seen everything, turned away and discreetly wiped his eyes. He'd been skeptical of Judge's order, had thought it was a mistake, potential judicial malpractice. He'd never been happier to be wrong. The judge's clerk and Tom's sister was crying openly at her desk. She'd spent the week arguing with her brother about this case, had questioned the judge's decision, had worried they were about to witness a child's complete psychological breakdown. Instead, she was watching something that felt almost like a miracle, small, fragile, but real. The silence that followed Emma's second utterance lasted perhaps 20 seconds, though it felt eternal. Every person in that courtroom was processing the same realization. They just witnessed something profound, something that transcended the legal battle and touched something fundamental about human nature, about healing, about the capacity for understanding even in the face of trauma. Judge finally found his voice, though it was rougher and more emotional than he'd ever allowed himself to sound from the bench. "Mrs., does Emma want to continue, or shall we conclude this session?" Sarah looked at Dr. Moore, silently asking the question she couldn't voice. "Is this okay? Is my daughter okay?" Dr. Moore leaned closer to Emma, her professional assessment overriding her personal emotion. Emma's breathing was still elevated but not dangerously so. Her body was tense but not frozen. Her eyes were focused and present rather than dissociated. And most remarkably, she was still looking at Zeus with curiosity rather than pure terror. "Emma, sweetie," Dr. Moore said softly, "you're being so incredibly brave. Zeus is being very good, isn't he? He's sitting so still and calm, just like we talked about." Emma nodded, a small but definite movement. Then she did something that made everyone's breath catch. She reached out one small hand and pointed at Zeus, then made a gesture that Dr. Moore had taught her in therapy, a thumbs up. Good. Sarah let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She's saying he's good, she explained unnecessarily to the room. She's telling us Zeus is being good. Officer lost the battle with his composure completely. He sank to his knees beside Zeus, one hand still firmly on the leash, the other arm wrapping around his partner's shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered, though it was unclear whether he was thanking Zeus or Emma or God or all three. "Thank you." Zeus remained in his down position, but his tail moved slightly, just once, the smallest wag of acknowledgement. He was still being good, still being calm, but some part of the dog's consciousness seemed to recognize that the atmosphere had shifted, that something important had changed. Emma watched the tail movement with fascination rather than fear. Dr. Moore saw the shift and made a split-second therapeutic decision. "Emma, do you see Zeus's tail? He's happy because you said he's a good boy. Dogs wag their tails when they're happy. Zeus is happy that you're not scared of him anymore." "Still scared," Emma whispered, and those two words were as important as her first two. She was acknowledging her fear, not denying it, but she was also acknowledging it as something separate from the reality before her. She could be scared and still recognize that Zeus was being good. Both things could be true simultaneously. "It's okay to still be scared," Dr. Moore validated. "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing something even when you are scared. And you're being so brave right now, Emma." Judge looked at Dr. Moore with a silent question. "Do we continue or stop here?" Dr. Moore considered for a long moment, weighing therapeutic benefit against risk of pushing too far. Finally, she made a decision that would prove crucial. "Your Honor, I believe we should conclude this session now. Emma has made an extraordinary breakthrough, and I want to preserve this positive experience without risking regression by pushing further." Judge nodded immediately. "Officer, please remove Zeus from the courtroom. Slowly and calmly, please." Rose to his feet, his face still wet with tears, and gave Zeus the release command. "Come." Zeus rose smoothly to his feet, and for just a moment, Emma's body tensed again as the dog moved. But Zeus simply turned and walked calmly beside toward the rear door, his movements controlled and unhurried. Just before they exited, paused and turned back. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened. Zeus and we never wanted to hurt you. Thank you for being brave enough to see that Zeus is a good dog. Thank you for giving us both a chance." Emma didn't respond verbally, but she watched Zeus leave, and she didn't hide her face or scream or panic. She just watched, her small hand gripping her mother's shirt, processing everything in her 4-year-old mind. When the door closed behind them, the courtroom released a collective breath that had been held for what felt like hours, but had actually been just under 7 minutes. 7 minutes that had changed everything. Judge gavelled the session closed with hands that still trembled. "This court will recess. We'll reconvene in my chambers in 1 hour. Dr. Moore, I'll need your preliminary assessment. Counsel, be prepared to discuss how we proceed from here." But everyone knew the truth. The case had fundamentally shifted. You couldn't watch what had just happened and remain unchanged by it. The legal arguments, the liability questions, the damages calculations, all of it suddenly seemed less important than the simple truth that had emerged from a 4-year-old's mouth. "Good boy." 2 words that had stopped time, melted hearts, and opened a door to healing that no one had dared to believe possible. 2 words that would echo through legal circles, trauma therapy discussions, and the hearts of everyone present for years to come. 2 words that proved sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest voices. The chamber's meeting began 63 minutes after Emma's breakthrough, though Judge had said 1 hour. No one complained about the delay. Everyone needed the extra time to process what they'd witnessed. Jennifer entered looking like a different person than the confident attorney who'd held that press conference months ago. Her briefcase, usually filled with aggressive legal strategies and demands, now felt heavy with irrelevance. She sat across from, and for the first time since the lawsuit began, they exchanged a look of genuine understanding rather than adversarial calculation. "Before we begin formal discussions," Judge said, his voice still rough with emotion, "I want to say something. What happened in that courtroom this morning transcended law. I've been a judge for 32 years and I've never witnessed anything like it. That child, that brave, extraordinary child, taught us all something about compassion, forgiveness, and healing that no legal textbook could ever capture." He paused, looking at each person in turn. "I'm going to be blunt. I believe both sides need to reconsider their positions. This case was never really about money or liability. It was about a family's pain and an officer's remorse, and somehow, impossibly, a 4-year-old just showed us a path forward that none of us were wise enough to see." Sarah, holding Emma in her lap, spoke first. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I want to tell you all something. For months I've been consumed by anger. I wanted someone to pay for what happened to my daughter. I wanted Zeus removed from service, maybe even euthanized. I wanted Officer punished. I wanted the world to acknowledge that my baby's suffering mattered." She looked down at Emma, who was coloring quietly on a piece of paper Dr. Moore had provided, her first voluntary engagement with art in months. "But this morning, my daughter showed more wisdom than I've had this entire time. She looked at the source of her trauma and saw not a monster, but a dog who was trying to be good. If Emma can find that kind of understanding, what right do I have to demand vengeance?" Nodded his hand on his wife's shoulder. "We never wanted to destroy anyone's life. We just wanted our daughter back. And this morning we got a glimpse of her. The real Emma, the brave Emma. Maybe the path to getting her back completely isn't through punishment but through healing." Officer Mike, still in his dress uniform but looking wrung out emotionally, leaned forward. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Mr. and Mrs., I know I've said this before through lawyers and formal statements, but I need to say it directly to you now. I am profoundly sorry. Not as a legal position, not as a defense strategy, but as a father and a human being. What Zeus did to Emma was an accident, but that doesn't make your pain less real or your daughter's trauma less valid. I would give anything to undo that day." He wiped his eyes, not bothering to hide his emotion. "If settling this case means accepting responsibility, if it means changes to how we secure K-9 vehicles, if it means funding Emma's therapy for as long as she needs it, I support all of that. What I can't support is Zeus being destroyed for being a dog, for having one moment where training protocols failed due to a mechanical defect. But I understand if you disagree. I understand if you believe Zeus is too dangerous to continue serving." The room fell silent. Judge turned to Dr. Moore. "Doctor, from a therapeutic perspective, what's your assessment of how we should proceed?" Dr. Moore set down her coffee cup and spoke with the authority of her expertise. What Emma demonstrated this morning was the beginning of cognitive reframing, her brain starting to separate the traumatic memory from the actual threat level. This is exactly what we've been trying to achieve through months of therapy, but seeing Zeus calm and controlled did more in 7 minutes than I could accomplish in dozens of sessions. She pulled out her notes. However, this was just the beginning, not the completion of Emma's healing. She's still traumatized. She still has significant anxiety. She still faces years of therapy. But this morning proved something crucial. Emma can heal. The trajectory we saw suggested permanent, debilitating trauma. What happened today opened a different path, one where Emma might actually recover her childhood. Dr. Moore looked directly at Sarah and, "If you're asking my professional opinion, I believe continued, carefully controlled exposure to Zeus, combined with intensive therapy, could actually accelerate Emma's healing. The idea of Emma interacting with Zeus, the specific source of her trauma, under controlled conditions might help her generalize that safety to other dogs and situations. It's unconventional, but then again, so was this morning's session." Jennifer processed this information and years of legal training warred with what she'd witnessed. Finally, she spoke as a person rather than an attorney. "Sarah, I want to be clear that you have an incredibly strong case. The doorbell footage, the medical evidence, Emma's psychological trauma, we could win significant damages. But, she paused, choosing words carefully, I'm no longer certain that winning in court would actually give you what you really want, which is your daughter's wellness. She laid out a folder. I've taken the liberty of drafting a settlement proposal based on conversations I had with Mr. before this meeting. It includes full coverage of all Emma's medical and psychological care through age 18, no caps or limitations. A college fund of $150,000. Implementation of new K-9 vehicle security protocols not just in but statewide, with the family's input on the standards. A formal acknowledgement from the police department that Emma's trauma was real and valid, and that policy failures contributed to the incident. Opened his own folder. The department has agreed to these terms. Additionally, we're proposing funding for a community education program about police K-9s, teaching children and families about how these dogs work, proper behavior around them, safety protocols. Officer has volunteered to lead this program, and if the family agrees, we'd like Emma's story to be part of the education, showing both the potential risks and the possibility of healing. There's one more element, Jennifer continued, glancing at Dr. Moore. At Dr. Moore's suggestion and contingent on your approval, we're proposing a structured therapy program where Emma would have supervised, gradual contact with Zeus over the next year. Short sessions, heavily controlled, with Dr. Moore present and full authority to modify or terminate if Emma shows distress. Sarah's eyes widened. You want Emma to spend time with Zeus, the dog that hurt her. Only if you consent, and only under the strictest therapeutic protocols, Dr. Moore interjected. But Sarah, think about what Emma said this morning. Good boy. She saw Zeus being calm and controlled, and something clicked in her brain. Imagine if over time, in safe increments, Emma could play fetch with Zeus, could see him doing tricks, could gradually rebuild her neural pathways around dogs from terror to normalcy. It's exposure therapy taken to its logical conclusion. Spoke up, his voice thoughtful. What about Zeus? Would he stay on active duty? Nodded. Yes, with modifications. The vehicle security defect has been corrected across the entire fleet. Zeus would undergo additional behavioral to document that he poses no danger. An officer has agreed to additional training focused on public interaction scenarios. But Zeus is 7 years old. He has perhaps 3 more years of service left. After that, officer plans to adopt him as his family pet. Judge leaned back in his chair. I want to be clear about something. I'm not pressuring anyone to settle. If the family wants their day in court, that's absolutely their right. But I will say that what I witnessed this morning suggests an opportunity for restorative justice rather than punitive justice. A chance for everyone to heal rather than for someone to be destroyed. Sarah looked at Emma, who had drawn a picture, her first voluntary artwork in months. Sarah picked it up and her breath caught. Emma had drawn a purple butterfly, a stick figure of a little girl and a brown dog. The dog was sitting, just like Zeus had sat in the courtroom. Above the dog, Emma had written in her shaky 4-year-old handwriting, God boy. She meant good boy but spelled it wrong, Sarah whispered, showing. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at her daughter's drawing, evidence of processing, of understanding, of the beginning of healing. Pulled Sarah and Emma close. The family huddled together for a long moment, a silent conversation happening between parents who'd been through hell together. Finally, Sarah looked up. We accept the settlement terms, she said quietly. All of them, including the therapy program with Zeus, but I have conditions. Name them, said immediately. First, if at any point Emma shows regression or increased trauma from contact with Zeus, the program stops immediately, no questions, no pressure to continue. Second, officer attends every single session. Emma needs to see that Zeus has a person who controls him, who cares for him, who keeps him safe and keeps others safe from him. Third, we want quarterly reports on the statewide K-9 vehicle security implementation. Emma's trauma has to mean something. It has to make other children safer. Agreed to all conditions, said without hesitation. Judge looked at Jennifer. Ms., are you satisfied with these terms on behalf of your clients? Jennifer smiled, a genuine smile, not the calculated expression of legal victory. Your Honor, I'm satisfied that we're doing what's actually best for Emma rather than what's best for my bank account. Yes, I'm satisfied. Then let's make it official, Judge said, and began drafting the settlement order. The paperwork took 3 hours. By early afternoon, the settlement was signed, filed, and official. The V Police Department case was resolved. But the real story, the story of healing, was just beginning. 3 months later, Emma's first voluntary session with Zeus took place on a sunny February afternoon in Dr. Moore's large backyard. Emma held Sarah's hand tightly as Officer brought Zeus out. The dog was on a long training lead, giving him freedom to move but keeping him under complete control. Hi, Zeus, Emma said softly. Her voice was stronger now, more confident. 3 months of therapy following the breakthrough had yielded remarkable progress. Emma was speaking in full sentences, sleeping through most nights, and had even started attending a special preschool program. Zeus's tail wagged slowly. He sat without being commanded, his posture relaxed and friendly. Emma, would you like to give Zeus a treat? Dr. Moore asked, holding out a dog biscuit. Emma hesitated, then nodded. She took the treat with trembling fingers and stepped forward. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. She stopped about 5 feet from Zeus and held out the treat. Closer, Officer encouraged gently. He can't reach from there. I've got him, Emma, you're safe. Emma took 2 more steps. Zeus remained perfectly still, only his tail moving. Emma extended her small hand and Zeus gently took the treat, his mouth soft and careful. Emma giggled, the first genuine laugh Sarah had heard in nearly a year. He tickled my hand. By the 10th session in April, Emma was throwing tennis balls for Zeus, laughing as he retrieved them. By the 20th session in July, Emma asked if she could pet Zeus. With Dr. Moore's approval and Officer's close supervision, Emma touched Zeus's head, running her fingers through his fur. Soft, Emma pronounced. Zeus is soft and good. 1 year later. Emma's 5th birthday party was different from her 4th. This one had balloons, cake, and a dozen preschool friends running around the backyard, and one special guest. Officer arrived in civilian clothes, Zeus wearing a festive instead of his police vest. Emma ran up to them, ran confidently with no fear, and threw her arms around Zeus's neck. Zeus came to my party, she announced to her friends. This is my friend Zeus. Sarah watched from the porch, his arm around her waist, tears of joy rather than anguish running down her face. A year ago, I didn't think we'd ever get here, she whispered. But we did, replied, because our daughter is stronger than we ever imagined. Officer approached them carefully. Thank you, he said simply, for giving Zeus a second chance, for giving me a second chance, for showing all of us what real forgiveness looks like. Sarah surprised herself by hugging him. Thank you for being part of her healing, for showing up every single session, for caring about her recovery as much as we do. Dr. Moore observed from a distance, making notes for what would become a groundbreaking paper on trauma recovery through controlled exposure. The case would be taught in psychology graduate programs as an example of innovative trauma therapy. Judge's controversial decision would be studied in law schools as an example of restorative justice. The statewide K-9 vehicle security protocols would prevent 3 similar incidents over the next 5 years. But none of those broader impacts mattered as much as the simple scene unfolding in the backyard. A little girl in a purple dress playing fetch with a German shepherd, her laughter ringing out clear and pure. Her trauma transformed not into forgotten history, but into integrated experience. Something she'd survived, something that had made her stronger, something that had taught her that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds. Zeus retrieved the tennis ball and brought it back to Emma, dropping it at her feet. Emma picked it up, wound up her small arm, and threw it again, shouting with delight as Zeus bounded after it. "Good boy, Zeus," Emma called out. "Good boy." Those two words, the same words that had stopped time in a courtroom a year ago, now rang out with pure joy, untainted by trauma, spoken by a child who had faced her worst fear and emerged not broken, but beautifully, incredibly whole. Sarah took a photo. Emma, grinning widely, Zeus sitting beside her, both of them squinting into the sunshine. That photo would live on Sarah's nightstand forever, a reminder of the day everything changed and the longer journey of the year when everything healed. Because sometimes justice isn't about punishment or revenge. Sometimes justice is about a 4-year-old girl finding the courage to say, "Good boy," to a dog who hurt her, and a dog being gentle enough to deserve those words. Sometimes justice is simply about healing, forgiveness, and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, especially when that spirit belongs to a child brave enough to teach all the adults around her what real courage looks like. Emma's laughter continued ringing through the sunny afternoon, a sound more beautiful than any legal victory could ever be. And somewhere in that sound was the echo of two words that had changed everything. "Good boy."